So there's one other piece I just want to add to that, this piece around being breathed or breathing underneath the tissues. And it's that there's a there's an opening of consciousness to maybe notice what's there all the time. So yeah, I think it's an opening of consciousness to um, to what's there all the time.
Mm. And you mentioned that you studied with Priscilla
Mhm.
at first, but Robert Lippmann and then Priscilla. Could you speak a little about your continuum teachers, the inspiration you drew from them, their styles, what you appreciated in each of them and others?
Yes. So with Robert, there was a sense that he really lived what he taught. And that opened something in me in witnessing that. Also, all the ways he was talking about breath, again, I mean, I know I said this before, but it just resonated so deeply in places that some things I already had verbalized and kind of knew for myself, but other things that I did not yet, but my being knew. And he also honestly, his work with Buteyko was really important to me and has remained important to me since that time. I use it continually, particularly the breathing through the nose at every time I'm conscious about it.
Could you speak a bit more about Buteyko and what that is?
Sure. So, I mean, Robert would probably be better to speak to this than me, but Buteyko is a method of breathing and a style of breath training where some of the focus, a lot of the focus is breathing through the nose, but also reduced breathing so that we're not over breathing in life. And to me, it was also a just an introduction around doing less, and that my body, if I can just soften in, then it has what it needs to be able to breathe. And so much so, I mean, that has changed how I do, instead of doing nebulized treatments through my mouth, through a mouthpiece. There's a few that I still have to, the antibiotic treatments, but most all my treatments I do through my nose. I ask specifically for a mask. I really ask more for what I need. You know, when I'm breathing, when they have me breathe at the doctor's office, I'm doing it through my nose, even when they ask me to do it through my mouth. So it was really changing lifestyle and just being more conscious of when I am exhaling through the mouth, when I am kind of gasping for air. And so that has informed me since that point, and I use it every day. Um, and there's he I know a lot of athletes do Buteyko training. I think it's from originates from Australia, but again, Robert would be better for that. Yeah.
And you were speaking before that about your teachers. And so you were speaking about Robert. And yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yeah. So Robert really introduced me to a lot of things that I use to this day still. Well, actually, all of my continuum teachers have. But it was a new way to look at breath, and I loved some of the imagery he brought in around, like I said, the octopus and the respiratory diaphragm, but also all the other diaphragms in our body and our system, and all these places we can access that kind of movement that then also assists our lungs and our being in breathing. And with Priscilla, I'm so grateful to Priscilla Auchincloss. She was a wonderful, thoughtful, very thoughtful teacher. And she brought in so many different things to our classes that she was experiencing in her everyday life and exploring and curious about. We looked at permaculture pieces and really introduced me to everything in the beginning of Continuum. And she really encouraged our listening and has always encouraged me to just continue to explore. And she encouraged me into my own teaching. She is probably the reason that I am teaching at this point. And that's a little bit different of a story, but she's so essentially important to me. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful to her. And of course, then through Priscilla, I was introduced to the rest of our, the Rochester community. So many in that community had worked with Emily, were so deep into Continuum. So even though they were not my official teachers, they were my teachers in our shared field. And I was able to tap into all of their experience and the depth in the work. And then I was introduced to Emily and did a number of workshops with her. And then travel was challenging for me with my body and my medical condition. So as soon as she started doing virtuals, which at that time were over the phone, I took every single one I could. I worked with Emily. I would journal and video some of my movement and pieces in my own practice at home, and I would send them to her. So was fortunate to be able to have her input in that way and influence. I took a workshop with Susan Harper also in Rochester, and I don't remember exactly what the first one was called, but I do remember, and again, this has stayed with me. It all has stayed with me. It's made its imprint. But we were working with heart roots and through the feet, and I got to first experience my feet being hungry for life and texture and exploration, and how that opened my heart. And before that point, I tended to be someone who was very heart kind of centered and heart open in a way. But what I was discovering through her work and her introduction was that I hadn't fully established my roots yet. And so I didn't have that access to grounding for my heart quite yet. It was just wide open. And I mean, of course, not all the time, but that was my tendency and through my work with her, I've really been able to, at that point anyway, and so much more since then, but really deepen into the depth of my heart roots and my being and nourishment that way, and finding grounding, finding my earth seat. So important. And then I also need to mention all the teachers I've done. I used to go to Omega with Emily for her workshops there. And then after she passed, Elaine Calandreas started doing workshops there and she invited multiple teachers in. And so I was so fortunate to get the exposure and experience the different teachings of the different teachers and how it can all blend together and the different lenses. And there's so many. It would take me a while to name all that were there, but incredibly grateful to have shared space with each and every one of them, and to witness Elaine's orchestration of what was possible after Emily, because it was really kind of uncertain. And I saw how the work continued on through so many different individuals. And I'm really grateful to Elaine for pulling that piece together and getting to experience that as well.
Mm. And you've really given a sense of how each teacher brings their own style, their own perhaps focus. And you mentioned, Susan, and exploring the heart roots and really finding your own ground and heart in a different way. And you also said that Priscilla brought in permaculture pieces. And I'd love you to speak a bit more about that and what exactly she was introducing you to, just, I guess, to give a sense of the breadth of Continuum, how different aspects of life can be brought in and offered.
Mm-hmm. So again, it's been some time since that piece, but what I remember is that, and this was only, one piece of her offering, she was always bringing different pieces from what she was curious about and her own exploration. So maybe it was something she was reading at the time. And I think this is actually where some of the permaculture piece came from. In this particular, there's a few series that we kind of were in this vein, I feel. And she was bringing in some readings from some different teachers of permaculture, and we were really looking at how nature works for itself, how all the different intricacies of support and interwovenness, interconnectedness, and that when you work with the earth and nature in this way, how it can really support life. And so we looked at these different motifs of how just the way nature is already set up, how nourishing that is, to recognize that, to know that, to really appreciate that. And that's what I remember most. And it also just really re-piqued my own interest in gardening within the rhythms of nature. And I already, had some of that appreciation, but I remember really waking up to some of that. And part of the waking up to some of that, again, I think had to do with the waking up in my system through discussing that, hearing those things, certainly, but then layering in the continuum dive to actually have some experiential knowing there, somatic knowing.